The Mississippi sun pressed down on Ironwood Bend Plantation like a hammer on an anvil, turning the air thick and heavy with moisture that clung to skin like a second layer of clothing. It was the kind of heat that made breathing feel like swallowing fire, the kind that turned the cotton fields into a shimmering hell where the line between earth and sky blurred in waves of distortion. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, her fingers trembling slightly as another contraction rippled through her swollen belly. She was 9 months along now. She'd stopped counting the weeks somewhere between the endless rows of cotton and the sleepless nights in the cramped quarters where privacy was a luxury no one could afford. Her back ached with a deep, gnawing pain that had become so constant she'd almost learned to ignore it. Almost. Everything ached, her feet swollen and blistered in shoes that had worn through months ago, her hands calloused and bleeding from the sharp edges of cotton bowls, her heart heavy with a fear she couldn't name but felt in every breath. "Keep moving!" Overseer Gideon Rust's voice cracked across the field like a whip before the whip itself did. He sat atop his chestnut mare, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his sunburned face, pale eyes scanning the rows of stooped figures, picking cotton under his watch. Rust was a man who measured his worth in pounds of cotton, and the fear he could instill in a single glance. Sarah forced her hands to move faster, plucking the white bowls and stuffing them into the sack slung across her shoulder. The weight of it pulled at her spine, and with each handful she added, the burden grew heavier. The baby shifted inside her, pressing against her ribs with what felt like a tiny fist or foot, and she gasped softly. "You hear me, girl?" Rust rode closer, his horse's hooves crushing cotton plants. "I see you slowing down." "I ain't slowing, sir," Sarah said quietly, keeping her eyes on the plants. Never look him in the eye. That was the first rule everyone learned. Eye contact meant defiance, and defiance meant pain, but her body betrayed her. Another contraction seized her, stronger this time, a wave of pressure that radiated from her lower back and wrapped around her abdomen like iron bands. She doubled over with a sharp intake of breath, one hand clutching at her belly. The sack slipped from her shoulder and hit the ground with a muffled thud. Rust dismounted in one smooth motion. The other enslaved workers in the nearby rows went silent, their hands still moving, but their eyes watching. "You dropping my cotton now?" Rust approached. "You think because you got a baby in you, you get to slack? Before we begin this journey deeper into one of Mississippi's darkest and most unspeakable stories, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments, and if this is your first time on our channel, subscribe now, because what you're about to hear is a story that official history tried to bury, but memory refused to forget. Sarah straightened as much as she could. "No, sir. The baby's coming. I think the baby's coming." "You just nothing." He grabbed her arm roughly. "You cost me money every second you stand here breathing. You understand?" "Yes, sir." "I'm sorry, sir. I don't think you understand at all." He shoved her toward the edge of the row where a wooden post stood, a whipping post, though it was rarely called that. Everyone knew what it was for. The wood was dark with old bloodstains. "Please," Sarah whispered. "The baby. It's coming. I can feel it." "The baby ain't picking cotton," Rust said flatly. "You are." He called over 2 field hands, Isaiah and Thomas. Their faces were masks of anguish as they tied her wrists to the post, her swollen belly pressed against the rough wood. The first lash came without warning, and Sarah's world exploded into pain. She bit down on her lip so hard she tasted blood. The second lash came, then the third. By the 5th, her vision blurred. By the 7th, she felt wetness running down her legs. Not blood, but something else. Her water had broken. Rust didn't notice, or didn't care. The 10th lash finally came, and only then did he stop. The men untied her, and she collapsed onto her knees in the dirt. "Get back to work," Rust said. "All of you." Sarah couldn't stand. Mama Bess shuffled over and helped her to her feet. "Come on, baby," Mama Bess whispered. "We got to get you back to the quarters." Somehow they made it across the field as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The slave quarters at Ironwood Bend were a testament to the bare minimum required to keep human beings alive enough to work. 6 wooden shacks stood in a crooked row, each structure leaning slightly, as if tired from bearing witness to so much suffering. The buildings had been constructed quickly and cheaply 15 years ago, and time had not been kind. Gaps between the boards let in wind, rain, and insects. The roofs leaked. In winter, frost formed on the inside walls. Sarah's cabin housed 6 people: Sarah herself, Mama Bess, Clara and her 2 young children, and an old man named Ezekiel, who was too weak for fieldwork but still useful for carpentry. Mama Bess and Clara managed to get Sarah inside and onto the thin straw mattress. The single room was dim, lit only by fading sunlight through the gaps. The space smelled of sweat, wood smoke, and something sour that permeated everything. "Clara, get some water," Mama Bess ordered, "and find some clean cloth. This baby's coming fast." Clara nodded and hurried out. Sarah writhed on the mattress, her hands clutching at the rough fabric. The contractions were coming faster now, each one a wave of pressure so intense it felt like her body was trying to turn itself inside out. Her back screamed where the whip had torn her skin open. "I can't do this," Sarah gasped, tears finally breaking free. "Mama Bess, I can't." "Yes, you can." Mama Bess knelt beside her, pressing a cool hand to Sarah's forehead. "You stronger than you know, child. Your mama was strong, and you got her blood running through you." Sarah's mother, Delilah, had been sold 5 years ago to a plantation in Alabama to settle gambling debts. Sarah had watched her mother being led away in chains, watched until she was just a speck on the horizon. She never saw her again. "She ain't here," Sarah whispered. "But I am," Mama Bess said firmly. "And you ain't alone, you hear me?" Clara returned with a wooden bucket of water and cloth strips. Mama Bess dipped one in the water and began gently cleaning Sarah's face. "How bad?" Clara asked quietly, nodding toward Sarah's back. "Bad enough." Mama Bess didn't elaborate. They all knew what 10 lashes could do. The hours passed in a haze of pain and exhaustion. Outside, the sounds of the plantation settling for night filtered through the walls. Through the gaps, Sarah could see stars beginning to appear, distant points of light that seemed impossibly far away. She thought about the baby. What kind of world was she bringing him into? She knew somehow that it was a boy. She dreamed of him. "What you gonna name him?" Clara asked softly. Sarah hadn't thought about names. Names were dangerous. Names made things real, made them matter, and mattering was the surest way to get your heart broken. "Don't know yet," Sarah managed. "How about Samuel?" Mama Bess suggested. "That's a strong name, a good name." Sarah nodded weakly. Samuel. Yes, that felt right. Another contraction hit, stronger than all the others combined, and Sarah screamed. She couldn't help it this time. The sound tore out of her throat like something wild. "That's it, baby," Mama Bess said, moving quickly to position herself at Sarah's feet. "You got to push now. You hear me? The baby's ready. Push." Sarah pushed. She pushed with everything she had left, pushed until black spots danced in her vision, pushed until she thought she might actually die from the effort. Her entire world narrowed to this single moment, and then, suddenly, impossibly, release. A thin, warbling cry filled the cabin, piercing and beautiful. "It's a boy," Mama Bess said, her voice thick with emotion as she held up the tiny, squirming bundle. "You did it, Sarah. Samuel is here." Sarah reached for her son with trembling, exhausted hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. Mama Bess placed him gently on Sarah's chest, skin to skin, and for the first time in 9 months, maybe for the first time in her entire 24 years of existence, Sarah felt something other than fear or exhaustion or the dull resignation that came from living in bondage. She felt love. It was overwhelming, this love. It crashed over her like a storm surge, drowning out everything else. The pain in her back, the ache in her body, the horror of the day, all of it faded into insignificance compared to the weight of this tiny person on her chest. He was real. He was here. He was hers. Samuel. Her Samuel. He was perfect in the way that all newborns are perfect. 10 tiny fingers, each one perfectly formed, 10 tiny toes, a head full of dark, downy hair, eyes squeezed shut. His skin was lighter than hers. His father had been a white man, one of Master Crow's friends who'd visited last winter, but Sarah didn't care. This baby was hers. "He's beautiful," Clara whispered from her corner, tears streaming down her dark face. She'd lost 2 babies herself, both sold before they could walk. "He is," Sarah agreed, her voice barely audible. She couldn't take her eyes off him, couldn't stop staring at every detail of his face as if she could memorize him completely. Mama Bess worked quickly, tying off the umbilical cord with string and cutting it with a heated knife. She cleaned Sarah as best she could with the limited water and cloth, though the wounds on her back would need more care than could be provided here. "You need rest," Mama Bess said firmly. "Both of you need rest." But Sarah couldn't rest, couldn't even close her eyes. She was terrified that if she looked away, Samuel would disappear like smoke. She studied every detail of his face with desperate intensity. His tiny nose, the curve of his lips, the way his fingers curled into miniature fists, even in sleep. "You gonna be all right," she whispered to him. "I'm gonna make sure of it. I promise you that, sweet boy." It was a promise she had no power to keep, and somewhere deep inside she knew that. But she said it anyway, because what else could she do? The door to the cabin creaked open without warning, and everyone froze. Time seemed to stop. Master Vernon Crow stood in the doorway, his considerable bulk filling the frame. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and thick around the middle from too many rich meals. His beard was mostly grey now. His eyes were like chips of flint, hard, cold, calculating. Behind him stood Rust, holding a lantern. "So it's done," Crow said, his voice flat and businesslike. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. His gaze flicked to Sarah, then to the baby. "Boy or girl?" "Boy, Master," Mama Bess said quietly, lowering her eyes. Crow nodded slowly. "Good, that's good. Boys are worth more." He moved closer, and Sarah instinctively pulled Samuel tighter against her chest. Crow noticed and smiled, a thin, humorless expression. "Don't worry, girl. I ain't here to hurt your baby, not tonight." But Sarah knew better. She'd seen that look before. It was the look of a man calculating value. "He healthy?" Crow asked Mama Bess. "Yes, Master. Strong lungs, good color. No defects I can see." "Good, real good." Crow rubbed his beard thoughtfully. He turned to Rust. "Go fetch the papers from my office, the ones Thornton left when he was here." Rust nodded and disappeared into the night. Sarah's heart began to pound so hard she could hear it in her ears. Papers, Thornton. She'd heard that name before, a trader who specialized in babies. "Master, please." Sarah's voice came out broken. "Quiet," Crow said. "You done your job, Sarah. You gave me a healthy baby boy." "He's my baby," Sarah said. "No." Crow's expression hardened. "He's my property, just like you, and I already sold him." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. "Sold him 3 days ago. Man named Thornton buys babies to raise and sell later. Offered me $200. Good money." He paused. "Thornton will be back tomorrow morning to collect him. So you got tonight. You got these few hours to say goodbye." After Master Crow left, the cabin fell into a terrible, suffocating silence that seemed to press down on everyone like a physical weight. Even the usual night sounds from outside, the chirping of crickets, the distant voices from other quarters, seemed muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Sarah sat on her mattress, her back against the rough wooden wall despite the pain it caused, and held Samuel against her chest. She couldn't stop looking at him, couldn't stop touching him, his soft hair, his tiny hands, his perfect little face. She wept silently, great tears rolling down her cheeks and falling onto his blanket, but she made no sound. Mama Bess and Clara sat with her, their presence a small comfort in the overwhelming darkness. Clara had sent her own children to sleep in another cabin, not wanting them to witness this tragedy. "I won't let them take him," Sarah said finally, her voice raw from crying. "I won't. I'll die before I let them take my baby." Sarah. Mama Bess's tone was gentle but firm, the voice of someone who'd seen too much, survived too much. You can't fight this. You know you can't. There ain't no way to fight this. Then what am I supposed to do? Sarah looked up, her eyes wild with grief and fury. Just hand him over? Let them take him like he's nothing, like I'm nothing, like this means nothing? It means everything, Clara said fiercely, moving closer. It means everything, Sarah. But meaning something and being able to change something ain't the same thing. But Sarah didn't want to accept it. What kind of world was this where a mother couldn't protect her own child? What kind of justice allowed men to buy and sell babies like livestock? She looked down at Samuel, who had fallen asleep against her breast, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He didn't know, didn't understand that his whole life had already been decided by men who would never love him. How long? Sarah asked hoarsely. How long do I have? Crow said dawn, Mama Bess replied quietly. That's maybe 6, 7 hours from now. 6 hours. 7 if she was lucky. That's all the time she would have with her son. All the time she would ever have to be his mother. The injustice of it was so overwhelming, Sarah felt like she might shatter. I'm gonna run, Sarah said suddenly. The decision crystallized in her mind all at once, clear and sharp. I'm gonna take him and run. Tonight. Now. Sarah. No, Mama Bess began. Yes. Sarah's voice was steady now, filled with a desperate determination. I'd rather die trying to save him than just sit here and watch them take him. I'd rather us both die free than live like this. They'll catch you, Clara said, her voice thick with fear. Sarah, you know they'll catch you. They always catch runaways. And when they do... Adre, she trailed off, unable to finish. I don't care, Sarah said, and she meant it. Let them catch me. Let them kill me. At least I'll die trying. But that wasn't entirely true. She did care. She was terrified. Her body was broken, her back torn open and bleeding, her legs weak from childbirth. She had no food, no supplies, no plan. The nearest free state was hundreds of miles away. The odds were impossible. But what choice did she have? Stay here and watch them take Samuel? Stand by helplessly while they loaded him onto a wagon and drove him away forever? No, she couldn't do that. Wouldn't do that. Mama Bess seemed to read her thoughts. She sighed deeply, then reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small cloth bundle tied with string. This is all the cornbread I got, she said, pressing it into Sarah's free hand. It ain't much, but it's something. Clara, go get that old blanket from under your bed, the wool one your mama made. Mama Bess, you can't, Clara started. Do it, Clara obeyed. When she returned, Mama Bess helped Sarah wrap Samuel more securely in the wool blanket, creating a makeshift sling that Sarah could wear across her chest. It would keep him warm and leave her hands free. If you're gonna do this, Mama Bess said quietly, you need to go now, right now, before Rust starts his night rounds. Sarah knew the patrol schedule. Rust walked the quarters around midnight to make sure no one was causing trouble. After that, he usually went to his cabin and didn't emerge until dawn. It was just past 10 now. Thank you, Sarah whispered, embracing Mama Bess. Thank you for everything. You strong child. You got your mama's blood, and Delilah never gave up on nothing. Sarah looked at Clara. Take care of Mama Bess. We'll be all right, Clara said. You just keep going. Don't stop for nothing. Sarah nodded one final time, then slipped out into the night. The night air was cooler than the day, but still humid and thick, heavy with moisture from the nearby swamps. Sarah moved as quietly as she could, keeping to the shadows between the cabins, her bare feet making almost no sound on the packed earth. Samuel was awake now against her chest, making small, snuffling noises, but blessedly not crying. It was as if he understood that silence meant survival. She could see the main house in the distance, its windows glowing with lamplight, like malevolent eyes watching over the plantation. Master Crow was probably in his study, she thought, sitting in his leather chair, drinking his imported whiskey, reviewing his ledgers, calculating profits, counting human beings like cattle. Sarah turned away from the sight and headed toward the tree line that marked the boundary between the cultivated fields and the wild forest beyond. The cotton fields were empty now, the white bowls barely visible in the starlight. Tomorrow, those fields would be full again, full of people stooped and suffering under the sun. But Sarah wouldn't be among them. One way or another, she'd be gone. She reached the first line of trees and paused, looking back one last time at the only home she'd ever known. It wasn't much, a place of suffering and bondage, but it was familiar. The unknown ahead terrified her almost as much as what she was running from. Almost. She took a deep breath and stepped into the forest, and immediately the darkness swallowed her whole. The trees closed around her like a living wall, their branches interweaving overhead to block out even the starlight. Sarah had to feel her way forward, one hand outstretched to avoid walking into trunks, the other supporting Samuel against her chest. The forest floor was uneven, covered with roots that caught at her feet, and fallen branches that snapped loudly when she stepped on them. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness, every rustling leaf a potential threat. After maybe 15 minutes of stumbling progress, Samuel began to fuss, his small cries growing louder. Sarah stopped and carefully adjusted the sling, then guided his mouth to her breast. He latched on immediately, suckling greedily, and for a brief moment Sarah allowed herself to just be a mother feeding her child. But the fantasy couldn't last. Reality intruded too quickly. She stood there in the darkness, Samuel nursing, and tried to think clearly about what came next. She needed a plan. Running blindly would only get them caught faster. Where should she go? North, she knew, was the direction of freedom. But north was hundreds of miles away, and she had no map, no compass, nothing but the North Star to guide her. The questions multiplied faster than she could answer them, threatening to overwhelm her with their impossibility. Samuel finished nursing and detached, a small dribble of milk at the corner of his mouth. Sarah wiped it away gently and adjusted the sling again. She had to keep moving. Standing still meant death. She chose a direction. Northeast, she thought, based on the stars she could glimpse through gaps in the canopy, and started walking again. Time became meaningless in the darkness. It could have been 20 minutes or 2 hours. She had no way to know. Her legs ached, her back screamed in protest with every movement, and her bare feet were cut and bleeding from rocks and thorns she couldn't see. But she kept going. And then, somewhere in the distance behind her, she heard the sound she'd been dreading, the distant baying of hounds. They were coming. The hunt had begun. Sarah's blood turned to ice in her veins. The hounds. They'd discovered she was gone somehow, and they'd loosed the tracking dogs. Bloodhounds bred specifically for hunting runaways, animals that could follow a scent trail for miles through any terrain. She'd heard stories about those dogs, how they never gave up, how they could track a person through swamps and rivers, how they'd tear into flesh if they caught you. She ran. There was no more pretense of stealth, no more careful navigation. She simply ran, crashing through undergrowth, branches whipping at her face and arms, roots trying to trip her with every step. Samuel woke and began to cry, his wails cutting through the night air like a beacon, but there was nothing Sarah could do about it. "Please, baby," she gasped. "Please be quiet." She stumbled over a root and nearly fell, catching herself at the last second. The forest was growing thicker, the undergrowth tearing at her legs. She could barely see anything in the darkness. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. They were gaining. The baying was so close now she could hear individual dogs, at least 3, maybe more. Sarah burst through a line of bushes and found herself at the edge of a swamp. The water was dark and still, reflecting the sliver of moon overhead. She could smell it, stagnant and thick, tinged with decay. She had a choice: try to wade through and hope the water would throw off the hound's scent, or keep running along the edge and pray she could find somewhere to hide. Both options were terrible. The baying was so close now. Sarah didn't let herself think. She stepped into the swamp. The water was cold, colder than she expected. It rose quickly, first to her ankles, then her knees, then her waist. She held Samuel high above the surface, trying to keep him dry. He was screaming now, his face red and scrunched with distress. "I'm sorry," Sarah sobbed. "I'm so sorry, baby." The bottom of the swamp was soft and muddy, sucking at her feet with every step. She could feel things brushing against her legs, plants probably, but her terrified mind imagined snakes and alligators. She was halfway across when she heard the dogs break through the tree line behind her. "There!" a man's voice shouted. "In the water!" Sarah looked back and saw torches, 3 or 4 of them, held by men on horseback. Rust was among them. "Come on out, girl!" Russ called. "You ain't got nowhere to go!" Sarah didn't respond. She kept wading forward, though the water was up to her chest now, and Samuel's screams had reached a fever pitch. A gunshot cracked through the air, and Sarah flinched. The bullet splashed into the water several feet to her left. "Next one won't miss," Rust warned. Sarah's arms were shaking with the effort of holding Samuel up. She was so tired she could barely think straight. Maybe she should just give up. No, she wouldn't. She'd come this far. She'd fight until she couldn't fight any more. She reached the far side of the swamp and hauled herself onto solid ground, her dress clinging to her body, heavy with water. Samuel was soaked too, still screaming. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, kissing his forehead. "It's okay, sweet boy." But it wasn't okay. She heard the splash of horses entering the water behind her and knew she had minutes at most. She turned and ran again, deeper into the forest, her wet clothes weighing her down. And then, suddenly, the ground disappeared beneath her feet. Sarah tumbled down a steep embankment she hadn't seen in the darkness, unable to stop herself, unable to do anything but try to protect Samuel as they fell. She twisted her body, trying to take the impact on her back and shoulders rather than letting Samuel hit the ground. Branches whipped at her face, roots caught at her clothes, rocks struck her body with bruising force. The world became a chaos of pain and motion and terror, and then she hit the bottom with a jarring impact that knocked every bit of air from her lungs and made stars explode across her vision. For several long seconds, or maybe minutes, she couldn't tell, Sarah couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She lay at the bottom of what seemed to be a deep ravine or gully, stunned and broken, staring up at the strip of sky visible between the steep walls. Samuel. Where was Samuel? Panic cut through the fog of pain and gave her strength she shouldn't have had. Sarah forced herself to sit up, gasping, her ribs protesting, and felt frantically around in the darkness. Her hands found him a few feet away, still wrapped in the wool blanket. He was crying. Thank God he was crying. That meant he was alive. "Thank God," Sarah breathed, her voice coming out as a ragged sob. "Oh, thank God." She pulled him close and checked him over as best she could in the dim light. He seemed unharmed, just frightened and cold and wet. His cries had settled into hiccuping sobs that broke Sarah's heart. She looked around, trying to assess where they were. The ravine was narrow, maybe 6 feet across, with steep walls of earth and exposed roots rising at least 15 feet on either side. Above her, she could see the silhouettes of trees against the night sky. She heard the men shouting above, the hounds barking furiously at the edge. "She went over," someone yelled. "Well, go down and get her. It's too steep. We'll break our necks. Then go around, find a way down." Sarah knew she had minutes at most. She forced her battered body to stand, testing her weight. Her right ankle throbbed. She must have twisted it, but it held her weight. That would have to be good enough. She started moving along the bottom of the ravine, one hand trailing along the earthen wall for balance, the other supporting Samuel. The ravine twisted and turned, sometimes widening, sometimes narrowing so much she had to turn sideways to fit through. The walls were slick with moisture and covered in moss that glowed faintly in what little moonlight reached the ravine floor. The air down here was cooler and smelled of wet earth and decay. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes, the ravine began to slope gradually upward, becoming less steep. Sarah climbed using exposed roots and rocks as handholds, pulling herself up inch by painful inch, until finally she emerged onto level ground once more. The forest here felt different, older. The trees were massive, their trunks so thick it would take 3 or 4 people holding hands to circle them. Their canopy was so dense that almost no undergrowth grew on the forest floor. Sarah allowed herself to stop and rest for just a moment, leaning against one of the giant trees. Samuel had finally quieted, exhausted from crying. He looked up at her with wide, dark eyes that seemed far too knowing for a baby only hours old. "I love you," Sarah whispered to him. "No matter what happens, you remember that. Your mama loved you more than anything in this whole world." A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness to her left. Sarah's head whipped around. She strained to see into the shadows, but could make out nothing. "Who's there?" she called softly. Silence stretched out. Then a voice emerged from the shadows. "You're a long way from home, sister." A figure materialized from between the trees. A man, tall and lean with wiry strength. He was black, his face weathered and marked with scars. His clothes were patched but cleaner than expected. His eyes were sharp and assessing. Sarah tensed, ready to run again even though her body screamed in protest. The man held up his hands. "Easy now, I ain't gonna hurt you." "Who are you?" Sarah demanded. "Name's Josiah. I'm a runaway, like you. Been living in these woods for near about 2 years now." Sarah stared at him. She'd heard stories of runaways who escaped and hid in the forests. Maroons, they were called, but she'd always thought they were just stories. "Why should I trust you?" Josiah smiled sadly. "You shouldn't. Trust gets people killed. But I heard the dogs and figured someone was running. Thought I'd see if I could help." "They're coming," Sarah said. "The patrollers." "I know. That's why we need to move. Right now." Josiah led Sarah deeper into the forest with the confidence of someone who knew every tree, every rock, every hidden path. He didn't use a torch or lantern, didn't need one. His feet found their way through the darkness as if by instinct. Sarah struggled to keep up, her injured ankle protesting with every step, her body pushed far beyond the limits of endurance. But she forced herself onward, because what choice did she have? After maybe 20 minutes of steady walking, they emerged into a small clearing that Sarah never would have found on her own. It was hidden, surrounded by thick undergrowth and massive trees that blocked it from view in every direction. In the center, a crude shelter had been built from branches, leaves, and what looked like stolen canvas. A tiny fire burned in a carefully constructed ring of stones, its smoke dissipating through a lattice of green branches positioned above it. A clever trick to diffuse the smoke before it rose high enough to be seen. 2 other people were there. A woman who looked to be in her mid-30s with tired eyes and calloused hands, and a boy who couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, all skinny limbs and watchful silence. "This is Ruth," Josiah said, gesturing to the woman. "And that's Marcus. We're all that's left of our group. Used to be 9 of us, but..." He trailed off, his expression darkening with memories he clearly didn't want to relive. Ruth stood and approached, her gaze immediately going to Samuel with an expression of mingled sympathy and sorrow. "Lord have mercy, that baby can't be more than a few hours old." "He was born tonight," Sarah said quietly, and hearing herself say it made it feel even more impossible. Had it really been only hours? It felt like a lifetime. "And you ran?" Ruth's eyes widened with what looked like respect mixed with disbelief. "Girl, you either the bravest or the craziest woman I ever met. Maybe both." "They sold him," Sarah said, and her voice broke on the words. "Master Crow sold him to a trader. Man was supposed to come pick him up in the morning. I couldn't just let them take him." Understanding passed across Ruth's face, followed by a deep, aching sympathy that came from someone who'd experienced similar losses. "Come sit down, honey. Let me look at your back." Sarah did as she was told, too exhausted to argue or resist. She sank down by the fire, its warmth immediately noticeable after the chill of the wet clothes. Ruth carefully began to peel away the wet, bloody fabric of Sarah's dress, making sympathetic sounds when she saw the damage underneath. "Lord Jesus," Ruth breathed. "This is bad, real bad. You got at least 10 lashes here, deep ones, and they're already showing signs of infection. When did this happen?" "This afternoon, before the baby came." Ruth and Josiah exchanged looks that spoke volumes. "Can you fix it?" Josiah asked quietly. "I can try. I got some herbs that'll help with the infection. Yarrow and golden seal if I can find enough. But she needs rest, real rest, and food, and clean water. She needs more than we got in this camp. I'll be all right, Sarah said, though they all knew it was a lie. Infection could kill as surely as bullets, and out here with no medical care, even minor wounds could become fatal. Ruth worked quickly and efficiently, her movements practiced. She cleaned the wounds as best she could with water from a leather skin and a poultice made from crushed leaves that stung worse than the whipping itself. Sarah bit down on a stick and endured it, refusing to cry out, even though the pain was excruciating. While Ruth worked, Josiah kept watch at the edge of the clearing, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness, his body tense and alert. Marcus tended the fire, occasionally glancing at Sarah and Samuel with open curiosity, but saying nothing. "How long you been running?" Ruth asked as she wrapped strips of relatively clean cloth around Sarah's torso, covering the worst of the wounds. "Maybe 3, 4 hours. I don't know anymore. Time doesn't feel real." "It don't. Not when you're running. Days blur together out here." Ruth paused in her work. "They'll be searching all night, you know. And come morning, they'll bring more men. More dogs." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "Where you headed?" Josiah asked from his position. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She didn't have an answer. She'd run without a plan. "North," Josiah said firmly. "That's the only way. Got to get to the Free States, Ohio maybe, or Pennsylvania." "That's hundreds of miles," Ruth said quietly. "I know it is, but it's the only chance, the only real chance any of us got." Sarah looked down at Samuel, who was sleeping again. How could she possibly make it hundreds of miles with a newborn baby? "Will you help me?" Sarah asked, looking up at Josiah. Josiah was quiet for a long moment. "We leave at first light. Can't move much in the dark. But soon as there's enough light to see by, we move fast." "They'll catch up to us," Ruth warned. "Maybe. I got a few tricks. It ain't much, but it's something." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Josiah said grimly. "Surviving the journey kills most people." Sarah didn't sleep that night, though her body desperately, urgently needed rest. She sat by the small fire holding Samuel and watching the sky slowly change colors as dawn approached. From black to deep indigo to pale grey to the faintest hints of pink. The night was ending. A new day was beginning, and with it would come renewed pursuit, fresh dangers, impossible decisions. Ruth had forced some food into her, dried meat that was tough and salty but probably saved from someone's smokehouse, and cornbread that crumbled in her mouth but filled her empty stomach. Sarah ate without tasting, eating only because she knew Samuel needed her to nurse, and she couldn't produce milk if she was starving. Her body was a tool now, a means to keep her son alive. Josiah sat nearby, sharpening a knife on a flat stone he'd pulled from somewhere. The rhythmic scraping sound should have been ominous but was oddly soothing, a sign that someone was preparing, planning, thinking about survival. "You ever think about going back?" Sarah asked suddenly, surprising herself with the question. Josiah looked up, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Every single day. But you don't." "No, because going back means dying. Maybe not right away, maybe not that first day or week or even year, but eventually. Something inside you dies when you go back after tasting even the smallest bit of freedom. Out here I got a chance. Small chance, maybe the smallest chance there is, but a chance. Back there I got nothing but the certainty of dying slow." "I'm scared," Sarah admitted, her voice small. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you careful, keeps you alive. The day you stop being scared is the day you die." "I'm scared I'm gonna fail him." She looked down at Samuel, his perfect little face peaceful in sleep. "He deserves better than this. Better than a mother who's broken and bleeding and can barely stand." "He deserves to be free," Josiah interrupted firmly. "That's what he deserves. That's the only thing that matters, and you're the only one who can give him that. You understand? You're his only chance." Sarah wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe she was strong enough, brave enough, capable enough to save her son. But she felt like she was breaking apart from the inside. The sun finally crested the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and orange that were too beautiful for a day like this, too lovely for the darkness they contained. "Time to move," Josiah said, standing and stretching. "Gather what you got. We ain't coming back here." Ruth and Marcus were already packing their meager supplies, a few blankets, some food wrapped in cloth, a couple of tin cups. Sarah had nothing to pack except Samuel and the hope that they might survive another day. They moved out single file, following Josiah through the forest along paths only he seemed able to see. They walked for hours, stopping occasionally for Sarah to nurse Samuel or for everyone to drink from the streams they crossed. The forest seemed endless, an infinite maze of trees and undergrowth. By midday they heard it, the distant baying of hounds, closer than any of them expected. "They're moving faster than I thought," Josiah muttered, his expression darkening. "Must have picked up our trail somehow." "What do we do?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking with barely controlled fear. "We split up. Ruth, you and Marcus head due east toward the river. Follow it north. I'll take Sarah and the baby west. Try to draw the dogs away. We'll meet back at the old oak if we can. You know the one I mean." Ruth nodded grimly. She squeezed Sarah's hand once, a gesture of solidarity and farewell, then disappeared into the trees with Marcus at her side. Josiah led Sarah at near run, despite her exhaustion and injured ankle. They splashed through a shallow creek, trying to confuse the scent trail, then climbed a rocky outcropping that would leave no footprints. But it wasn't enough. An hour later, they emerged into a small clearing and found themselves surrounded. Overseer Rust sat on his horse in the center of the clearing, flanked by 4 other mounted men, all armed with rifles. The hounds strained at their leashes, barking furiously, their teeth bared. They'd been caught. "End of the line, Sarah," Rust said, and there was satisfaction in his voice. "You led us on quite a chase, but it's over now." Sarah's heart sank. They'd been so close to what? Freedom was still hundreds of miles away. They would never have made it. "Come on now," Rust continued. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Give me the baby, and come on back peaceful-like." Sarah looked at Josiah. Their eyes met, and in that moment something passed between them, understanding perhaps or resignation. Then Josiah moved. He lunged at the nearest mounted man with impossible speed, knocking him from his horse before anyone could react. The clearing erupted into chaos, men shouting, horses rearing, dogs barking, the crack of a rifle shot. "Run!" Josiah roared at Sarah. "Run and don't look back!" Sarah ran. Sarah ran until her legs simply gave out beneath her, until her body refused to take another step. She collapsed on the bank of a wide, slow-moving river, gasping for breath so hard her lungs burned. Her vision swam with exhaustion and blood loss and despair. Samuel was crying again, his wails weak and desperate, and Sarah realized with horror that she couldn't remember the last time she'd been able to nurse him properly. She looked at the river. It was wide, maybe 100 feet or more from bank to bank, and the current looked deceptively gentle, though she knew appearances could be deadly. On the far side, she could see the forest continuing, dark and endless, stretching toward a freedom that seemed further away than ever. Behind her she heard voices, the patrollers. They'd found her trail again, found her, and they were close. So close, she could hear their individual words now, could hear the excitement in their voices at finally cornering their prey. Sarah made a decision, the last decision she might ever make. She waded into the river, holding Samuel above the water as it rose around her body. The current was much stronger than it looked, pulling at her legs with surprising force, but she pushed forward anyway. The water rose to her waist, then her chest, and still she kept going. "Sarah, stop right there." It was Rust's voice, loud and commanding, but Sarah didn't stop, couldn't stop. She was committed now, had passed the point of return. The river bottom disappeared beneath her feet, and suddenly she was swimming, or trying to swim, one-handed while holding Samuel up with the other. Her dress dragged at her, heavy and waterlogged, trying to pull her under. Her muscles screamed in protest. She could barely keep her head above water, could barely breathe, but she was almost there, almost to the other side. A gunshot cracked across the water, and Sarah felt a sharp, burning pain explode in her left shoulder. She gasped and went under, swallowing river water, choking, but she fought her way back to the surface through sheer force of will. Samuel. Where was Samuel? Panic gave her impossible strength. She felt frantically through the water and found him, still wrapped in the wool blanket, still miraculously keeping his head above water. He was screaming, his little face red with terror. "I got you!" Sarah gasped, coughing up water. "I got you, baby boy! Mama's got you!" Her feet touched bottom again. Muddy, shifting bottom, but solid enough. She stumbled forward, dragging herself and Samuel toward the far bank. Blood from her shoulder wound, mixed with the river water, creating swirling red patterns in the current. She collapsed onto the far bank, pulling herself and Samuel out of the water with the last reserves of her strength. She looked back across the river through vision that was growing hazy around the edges. Rust and his men were on the other side, their horses pacing at the water's edge, but they weren't crossing. Why weren't they crossing? "You can't run forever, Sarah!" Rust shouted across the water, his voice carrying clearly. "We'll get you eventually. You hear me? There's nowhere you can go that we won't find you." Maybe that was true. Probably it was true, but not today, not right now. Today, she'd made it across the river. Today, she was still free. Sarah forced herself to stand, her body protesting every movement. She looked down at Samuel, who had stopped crying and was looking up at her with those impossibly wise eyes. "We're gonna make it," she whispered to him, her voice barely audible even to herself. "I don't know how. I don't know if I can keep this promise. But I swear on everything I got left in this world, we're gonna try. We're gonna keep trying until we can't try no more." And with that, she turned her back on Ironwood Bend Plantation, on Overseer Rust and his hounds, on Master Crow and his bills of sale, on everything she'd ever known. She turned toward the forest, toward the north, toward a future that was uncertain but her own to shape. She took one step, then another, and another. Behind her, Rust's shouts faded into the distance. Ahead of her lay hundreds of miles of dangerous territory, of hostile towns and slave catchers, and endless obstacles. The odds were impossible. The journey might well kill them both, but they were free. At least for this moment, at least for today, they were free. And sometimes, Sarah thought as she walked into the forest with her son held close, sometimes that has to be enough.